The wedding planner's voice was polite, careful, like she was calling about something routine. "Sir, the remaining balance for your brother's wedding reception is $28,400. How would you like to take care of that today?" For a second, I thought she had the wrong number. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Savannah, Georgia. Early light coming through the blinds. Coffee still hot. The house quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "why would you think I'm paying for my brother's wedding?" There was a pause, paper shifting on her end. "Your name is listed as the financial guarantor on the reception contract, Mr. Hayes." And just like that, the vineyard came back to me. The gravel lot, the white lights strung across the barn doors, my parents standing at the entrance like security, my mother stepping forward before I reached the door. "Michael, what are you doing here? I came for the wedding." She glanced behind her, lowered her voice. "Only family is allowed inside." I remember looking at her, waiting for the correction. "It never came. You weren't invited." I stood there, holding a wrapped box like an idiot while guests walked past me, laughing, carrying champagne glasses. 8 hours I'd driven from Georgia to Kentucky. Took time off from the Veterans Center. Bought a decent gift. Thought maybe things would feel normal again. They didn't. And now, 3 days later, a stranger was calmly telling me I owed $28,400 for a reception I wasn't allowed to attend. I leaned back in my chair. "Could you explain exactly how my name ended up on that contract?" I asked. Another pause. "Your brother indicated you would be covering the remaining balance as a wedding gift." I stared at the wall in front of me. I hadn't been invited, but somehow, I was paying. Something inside me went very still. Not angry, not yet, just clear. "Send me the paperwork," I said, because if my name was on that contract, I intended to find out exactly how it got there. I'm 63 years old. I live alone in a 1-story brick house on the east side of Savannah, about 15 minutes from the VA outpatient clinic where I volunteer 3 days a week. The place isn't big, but it's paid off. The lawn stays trimmed, the porch light works. The mailbox doesn't lean. I've always believed a man should keep his ground in order. Most mornings followed the same rhythm up at 6. Black coffee, local news low on the radio, a short walk before the heat sets in. Routine isn't boring when you've spent 25 years in the Marine Corps managing supply chains in places where routine meant survival. After I retired, I didn't need noise, I needed quiet. At the VA clinic, I help older veterans untangle paperwork benefits forms, disability claims, appointment backlogs. Nothing dramatic, just details, signatures, dates, corrections, problems you can solve with patience and a steady hand. I prefer that kind of work. It makes sense. My younger brother, Daniel, has never been wired that way. He's 8 years younger, growing up in southern Ohio. He was the one my parents hovered over. If he struggled in school, they called teachers. If he missed a deadline, they negotiated extensions. I was the opposite. Independent. Self-sufficient. At 18, I enlisted and left. My father shook my hand like I was shipping out to a factory job. My mother cried for a week. They said I was the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need help. Capability can become a reputation, and reputations become expectations. Over the years. If Daniel forgot to pay something, I'd cover it and he'd settle up later. If he needed advice, I'd give it. If my parents worried about him, I reassured them. It was easier that way, cleaner, no scenes. When I heard Daniel was getting married, I figured it was time to show up the way family is supposed to. I called the clinic coordinator and told her I'd be gone a few days. "My brother's wedding," I said. She smiled. "That's worth the drive." I thought so too. I didn't expect gratitude. I didn't expect speeches. I just expected a chair somewhere inside the room. Instead, I got a parking lot, and now, sitting at my kitchen table with a wedding planner claiming I owed nearly $30,000. I realized something I should have seen years ago. Being dependable doesn't mean being disposable. It just means people assume you'll carry the weight. When Daniel called to tell me he was getting married, his voice carried the kind of excitement I hadn't heard from him in years. Quick, almost nervous. "It's happening in September," he said. "Vineyard outside Lexington. Rachel's family found the place." "That's good," I told him. "Send me the details." He did. Email with the date, the address, hotel recommendations. No mention of anything unusual, no hint that I didn't belong there. I called the Veterans Center that afternoon and requested 4 days off. They didn't ask questions. I'd covered enough shifts over the years that no one minded when I needed time. The drive from Savannah to Kentucky is close to 8 hours if traffic cooperates. I left before sunrise on Thursday, the highway mostly empty. Sky still dark enough to feel private. I've always liked long drives. Gives a man space to think without interruption. I packed light. One overnight bag. A pressed navy blazer hanging in the back seat. On the passenger side sat a rectangular box wrapped in matte gray paper. Inside were crystal whiskey glasses. Not flashy. Solid weight. Something built to last. I don't buy gifts to impress people. I buy things I'd use myself as the miles rolled by. Old memories surfaced without much effort. Daniel and me in the backyard throwing a baseball. Sunday dinners with my mother moving between stove and table. My father watching us both like he was measuring something he never said out loud. Somewhere along the way, we'd grown into separate lives. I stayed in the Corps. He stayed close to home. I built structure. He drifted between jobs until one finally stuck. None of that felt unusual. Families stretch, but weddings are supposed to pull people back together. That's what I thought as I crossed into Kentucky. Fields opening up wide and green. By late afternoon, I pulled into the gravel lot of the vineyard. The place looked like something out of a magazine, rows of vines. White lights strung across a renovated barn. Guests already gathering in small, laughing groups. I shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the tick of the cooling hood. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to anticipation. Not dramatic, just steady. Like maybe this was a reset. Maybe whatever distance had settled between us over the years would feel smaller inside that room. I picked up the gift, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the entrance. I remember thinking, as I stepped onto the gravel path, that family doesn't always say what it should, but it shows up. I had shown up. I just didn't know yet that I wasn't expected to. The vineyard smelled like cut grass and expensive wine. White string lights were already glowing against the early evening sky. Guests moved in clusters across the lawn, women in pastel dresses, men adjusting cufflinks, laughter rising and falling like background music. Somewhere inside the barn, a band was warming up, drums tapping, a guitar checking its tuning. I walked up the gravel path with the gift tucked under my arm. That's when I saw my parents. They were positioned just outside the barn doors, greeting people as they arrived. My mother was smiling in that tight, practiced way she uses when she wants everything to look perfect. My father stood beside her, hands clasped in front of him, nodding at guests. He spotted me first. The smile disappeared, not slowly, instantly. My mother followed his gaze and turned around. For a split second, something crossed her face, surprise. Then calculation. She stepped toward me quickly before I reached the door. "Michael," she said under her breath, "what are you doing here?" I stopped a few feet away. I came for the wedding. She glanced over her shoulder toward the entrance as a couple brushed past us, offering polite nods. "Only family is allowed inside," she said. I looked at her. "I am family." Her jaw tightened. She lowered her voice further. "You weren't invited." The words didn't register at first. They hung there, separate from the noise around us. I waited for her to correct herself. She didn't. "You're serious?" I asked. My father stepped forward then, his expression stiff. "We didn't think you'd actually come." I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just distance. "Daniel knows I'm here," I said. "He has a lot going on today." My mother replied quickly. "We didn't want any distractions." Distractions. A bridesmaid hurried past us holding a tray of champagne flutes. Laughter spilled out from inside the barn. Music swelled briefly as the doors opened and closed behind another group of guests. I stood there holding a wrapped gift while strangers walked into a building I wasn't allowed to enter. 8 hours on the road, time off work, and my own parents guarding the door. I looked at my father. "So that's it." He didn't meet my eyes. "It's not personal." That almost made me laugh. I considered pushing past them, considered walking inside and forcing the issue. But I've spent too many years around men who escalate situations for pride. It rarely ends well. I handed the box to my mother. "Give this to them," I said. She took it awkwardly, like it weighed more than it did. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then I nodded once and turned around. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I walked back towards the parking lot. No one stopped me. No one called my name. I reached my truck and opened the door, but didn't get in right away. I stood there with one hand on the frame, listening to the muffled music drifting across the field. I wasn't embarrassed. Embarrassment is loud. This was quieter. It was the realization that somewhere along the line, I'd been moved from family to optional. I got behind the wheel and closed the door. Sat there for a minute. Watched headlights pull in as more guests arrived. Then I started the engine. The band inside the barn began playing something upbeat as I drove away. By the time I reached the highway, I had already decided one thing. I wouldn't call anyone if they wanted to explain. They knew how to reach me. 3 days after I drove back to Georgia, the wedding planner called about the $28,400 balance after she told me my name was listed as the financial guarantor. I didn't raise my voice. "Send me the contract," I said, "and any related documentation." She hesitated. "Of course. Mr. Hayes." When the email came through 20 minutes later, I opened it at the same kitchen table where I'd taken her call. The subject line was neutral, professional. Attached were invoices, receipts, and the final reception agreement. I clicked the contract first. There it was, at the bottom of the document, under a bold header labeled Financial Guarantor. My name appeared in clean-typed letters, Michael Hayes. My phone number. My email address. All accurate. Below that, on the signature line, was a name written in blue ink. My name. Not my handwriting. Not even close. The letters were too rounded. The M exaggerated. Whoever signed it had seen my signature before, but not enough to copy it properly. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. So that's how. I kept reading. The reception had been held in the vineyard's renovated barn hall. Dinner for 142 guests. Open bar, live band, late-night dessert station. Total cost just over $33,000. Daniel and Rachel had paid a $4,600 deposit. The remaining balance $28,400. Apparently, that balance was supposed to be my gift. My phone buzzed again. Another email from the planner, Claire. This one included the email thread between her and Daniel. I opened it. The first message read, "Hi, Claire. Just confirming my brother Michael will be covering the remaining balance as our wedding gift. He's coming in from Georgia for the ceremony. Feel free to contact him directly if needed." Below it, Claire had responded politely, thanking him for the clarification. Then Daniel had written again. "He'll probably prefer the invoice sent after the wedding so it doesn't ruin the surprise." I read that sentence twice, then a third time. I closed the laptop. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator cycling on. It wasn't the money that tightened my jaw. It was the planning, the coordination, the assumption. They hadn't panicked at the last minute and scribbled my name in desperation. They'd arranged it, expected it, and they'd done it knowing I wasn't even inside the building. I picked up the phone and called Claire back. "Mr. Hayes." She answered carefully. "I've reviewed the contract," I said. "That signature is not mine." There was a short pause, papers rustling again. "I see. I was not invited to that wedding." I continued. "I did not agree to cover that balance. I did not sign that document." Silence. "That was not the impression we were given," she said slowly. "I'm sure it wasn't." Another pause. "If you'd be willing to submit a written statement confirming that, our legal department will need to review the matter. I'll have it to you within the hour." When we hung up, I sat still for a moment. This was no longer about a parking lot. It was about forgery, about consent, about someone deciding I was responsible for a debt I'd never agreed to carry. For the first time since the vineyard, I felt something steady settle into place. Not outrage, clarity. If they wanted to play this quietly, that was fine. So would I. But this time, I wasn't cleaning it up. I printed the contract, set it on the kitchen table, sat there with a pen in my hand and studied my own forged name like it belonged to someone else. The ink pressed too hard into the paper, the stroke on the H wrong. Whoever wrote it had hesitated halfway through, like they weren't sure how I usually finished the signature. It wasn't just sloppy, it was careless. I flipped through the rest of the paperwork. Itemized catering, bar packages, band deposit, linen upgrades, a late-night bourbon tasting add-on I hadn't known about. Line after line of decisions made confidently on someone else's wallet. The deposit had been paid weeks earlier. The contract finalized days before the wedding. My name typed cleanly beneath a section labeled Financial Guarantor, like it had always belonged there. I leaned back and rubbed my jaw. It wasn't the first time Daniel had assumed I'd handle something. When we were kids and he broke a window playing baseball, I was the one who explained it to Dad. When he missed a rent payment in his 20s, I wired him money before he even asked directly, when he bounced between jobs. I floated him until the next paycheck came through. Our parents called it responsibility. I'm starting to think it was conditioning. You solve problems long enough. People stop asking whether they're yours. They just assign them. I picked up the email thread again and reread Daniel's line. He'll probably prefer the invoice sent after the wedding so it doesn't ruin the surprise. There was something almost casual about it, like he was scheduling a delivery. Not even anger in the words, just certainty. He hadn't been worried I'd refuse. He'd been worried I'd find out too soon. That told me more than the forged signature ever could. I stood up and walked to the sink, ran cold water over my hands, then shut it off, looked at my reflection in the dark window above the counter. 63 years old, retired, financially stable, quiet, predictable. From their perspective, I was the safest bet in the room. That's when I understood something I should have seen earlier. The wedding wasn't the first insult. It was the confirmation. Being told you weren't invited at the door wasn't about space. It was about hierarchy. I was useful, but not essential. Reliable, but not central. Expected to fund it, but not witness it. That's a pattern. Golden child, responsible child. One gets protected, the other gets deployed. I went back to the table and picked up the contract again. Traced the edge of the paper with my finger. Responsibility had always been my armor. But armor gets heavy when you're carrying other people's weight. For years, I'd told myself it was easier to absorb small messes than create conflict. Easier to write a check than argue. Easier to smooth things over than demand respect. That habit had trained everyone around me, including Daniel, including my parents. They didn't think they were exploiting me. They thought they were relying on me. There's a difference, but it disappears if you never draw a line. I sat down and opened my laptop again. Started drafting the written statement Claire had requested. Clear, direct, no emotion. I have never agreed to serve as financial guarantor. The signature on the contract is not mine. I did not authorize the use of my name. 3 paragraphs, signed digitally, sent. When the email confirmation pinged back, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because the money was safe, but because for the first time in my life, I wasn't stepping forward to fix what someone else had broken. I was stepping back and letting it land where it belonged. Daniel called around noon. I watched his name light up on my screen and let it ring twice before answering. Yeah. What did you say to the venue? His voice was tight. No greeting. I told them I didn't sign that contract. A sharp exhale. They're saying you refused to pay. I refused responsibility for something I never agreed to. There was a pause. Then irritation pushing through. You were supposed to help out, with what I asked evenly, with the reception. You know how expensive weddings are. You told them I'd pay $28,400, I said. Without asking me. You can afford it. There it was. The sentence hung between us like it had weight. That's not the point, I replied. It kind of is, he shot back. Mom and Dad can't cover that. Rachel's parents already paid for half. You've always had savings, retirement, pension. It's not like it would hurt you. I leaned back in my chair. You didn't invite me, I said. That wasn't my call. You signed the contract. Silence. Then you're making this bigger than it needs to be. I almost smiled. No, I said. You already made it exactly as big as it needed to be. He let that sit for a second. Why are you doing this? He asked. Doing what? Turning it into some kind of legal issue. It was supposed to be a gift. A gift requires consent. Another silence. Longer this time. You've always helped, he said. Softer now. Why is this different? I thought about that. Because this time, you put it in writing. Because this time, you didn't even let me in the building. But I didn't say all that. It's different, I said. Because you signed my name. He didn't respond immediately. I didn't forge anything. He muttered. Mom handled the paperwork. That signature isn't mine. Well, she probably just Daniel. He stopped. You told the venue I was paying. You told them to send the invoice after the wedding so it wouldn't ruin the surprise. I heard his breathing change. Slower. They showed you the emails. Yes. A long exhale. Look, he said, voice dropping. We were under pressure. The numbers kept climbing. Mom said you'd covered the difference and we'd work it out later. Work what out, we'd figure it out. By doing what I asked. Asking me after the fact. Silence again. He shifted tactics. You're really going to let this bury us in debt? You buried yourself, I said calmly. That's cold. No, I replied. It's accurate. Another pause. I can't believe you're doing this over an invitation, he snapped. You're holding a grudge. This isn't about a grudge. Then what is it about respect? The word landed harder than I expected. He didn't interrupt. You didn't think I'd come? I continued. You didn't think I'd question it. You didn't think I'd say no. That's not fair. It's exactly fair. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then his voice shifted again. Lower this time. You really would have paid, wouldn't you? The question surprised me. I considered it honestly. Yes, I said, if you had asked. That answer changed the temperature of the call. He didn't argue, didn't deflect. Mom said you caused a scene. He added quietly. I handed her a gift and left. Another long silence. Things got out of hand. He admitted. They did. I didn't think you'd... He stopped. Show up, I finished. Yeah. There it was again. The assumption. I always show up, I said. He swallowed audibly. So what happens now, he asked. You figure it out. I don't have $28,400. I know. So what am I supposed to do the same thing adults do when they sign contracts? I replied. You pay them. The line went quiet. Then, after several seconds, did we really hurt you that badly? That one took longer to answer. I looked out the window at the oak tree in my yard. Leaves barely moving in the breeze. Yes, I said. No anger, no volume. Just truth. He didn't argue this time. And when the call ended, I realized something had shifted. For the first time in our lives. Daniel understood I wasn't stepping in. Not this time. The responsibility was staying exactly where it belonged. Claire called the next morning. Her tone had changed. Less cautious, more procedural. Mr. Hayes, our legal department reviewed the documentation along with your written statement. I had already poured my coffee and taken my usual seat at the kitchen table. I figured they would, I said. There are inconsistencies with the guarantor signature. She continued. It does not appear to match the signature on file from previous correspondence. It wouldn't, I replied. A brief pause. Because of that, she said carefully, the venue cannot legally enforce financial responsibility against you. I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. That makes sense, however, she added. The contract remains binding for the primary clients who executed it. Daniel and Rachel, yes. Sir, there was something steady about hearing it stated that plainly. No emotion, no family dynamics, just facts. The balance has been reassigned to them, she continued. They've been notified. I'm sure they have. A soft exhale on her end. I'll be candid with you. This is not a common situation, I imagine not. She hesitated before speaking again. For what it's worth, you handled this with remarkable composure. I glanced at the stack of printed documents still sitting on the table. I've had practice, I said. We went over a few final details, confirmation of my written statement, acknowledgement that my name would be removed from all billing records, and documentation reflecting that the guarantor designation had been invalidated. Your file has been updated, she said. You will not receive further invoices regarding this event. Thank you. There was a small pause. If you don't mind me asking, she added quietly. Were you truly not invited? I looked out the window at my driveway. That's correct. I'm sorry, she said. The apology came from a stranger, and somehow it carried more weight than anything I'd heard from my own family after we ended the call. I closed my laptop and sat there for a minute. It wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge, it was correction. Something misfiled had been put back where it belonged. That afternoon, I drove to the Veterans Center like I always do on Tuesdays. The building is nothing impressive, just an aging brick complex near the VA clinic, but inside, it runs on order. Forms are reviewed, claims are processed, problems are addressed. At my desk, I helped an 80-year-old Navy veteran straighten out a benefits discrepancy that had stalled his payments for months. We found the missing signature, resubmitted the claim, fixed it. Real problems, clear solutions. When I stepped outside later that evening, the air felt cooler, early fall moving in. My phone buzzed as I reached my truck. Daniel? I let it ring once before answering. They reassigned the bill, he said immediately. Yes, you told them it wasn't your signature. It wasn't. A tight breath on his end. You could have handled this differently. I did. They're setting up a payment plan, he said. It's going to take years. That's between you and them. Silence. This is embarrassing, he muttered. I leaned against the side of my truck. It was supposed to stay private, he added. That was never my responsibility. Another pause. For the first time. He didn't sound angry, he sounded uncertain. And that told me everything I needed to know. Institutionally. The matter was closed. The contract belonged to the people who signed it, not the one they assumed would absorb it. The truth now had documentation behind it, and documentation doesn't argue. It just stands. My father called that evening. Not Daniel, not my mother. Him. Michael, he said. No preamble. We need to talk. I stepped out onto the back porch before answering fully. The sun was going down over the trees behind my house, the air cooler than it had been all week. I'm here, I said. There was a long pause on his end. I could hear a television playing faintly in the background. Same house, same living room I grew up in. The vineyard contacted your mother this morning. He began. I imagine they did. They said you filed the written statement. I did. Another pause. We thought you'd help. There it was again. Not, we're sorry, not we were wrong. Just expectation. I leaned against the railing. Dad, I said evenly, I drove 8 hours to attend that wedding. I know, you and Mom stopped me at the door. That was a misunderstanding. I let that sit there for a moment. A misunderstanding, I repeated. Well, he said slowly, Rachel's family wanted to keep it smaller. There were over 100 guests. He didn't respond. Then he said the sentence that explained more than he realized. We didn't think you'd actually come. I looked out at the yard. You didn't think I'd come to my own brother's wedding? You've been distant, he said. I live in another state, I replied. That's not distance, that's geography. He exhaled quietly. Your mother handled the paperwork, he added after a moment. I know she thought you'd cover the rest. Quietly, without asking me. She assumed yes. I interrupted gently. She assumed. Silence, for years. That assumption had worked in their favor. I'd written checks, covered deposits, smoothed things out. It had been easier than arguing. But this time, the assumption came with a forged signature. You can afford it, he said, almost reflexively. The same line Daniel had used. This isn't about what I can afford, it's about what we can't, he snapped, frustration finally slipping through. Your mother and I are retired, we don't have that kind of money. I nodded slowly. I understand. Then you see the problem. Yes, I said, I do. The problem wasn't the bill, it was the hierarchy. Daniel makes the mistake, Mom protects him, Dad rationalizes it, I absorb it. That had been the pattern for 60 years. I'm not paying that debt, I said calmly. You're really going to let your brother start his marriage buried in debt? That was his decision, I replied. Another long silence. You've changed, my father said finally. No, I said. I've stopped carrying things that weren't mine. He didn't argue. After a moment, his voice softened. Your mother's very upset. I'm sure she is. She says you're humiliating the family. I almost laughed. They told a business I would pay for something I wasn't invited to, I said. If anyone was humiliated, it wasn't you. That was supposed to stay private. There it was, not right or wrong. Appearance. I straightened up from the railing. It didn't stay private because it involved my name. He didn't respond. After a few seconds, he shifted. Daniel called earlier. He said, he's shaken. He should be. He asked something. My father continued. He wanted to know if he really hurt you. That question hit differently coming from him. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him he'd have to ask you. Fair enough. He didn't think you'd take it this far, my father added. This far, I repeated. All I did was refuse to lie. Silence, then something unexpected. I was proud when you joined the Marines, he said quietly. I just didn't say it right. I didn't answer immediately. That's not what this is about, I said. No, he agreed. But maybe it's connected? He cleared his throat. Daniel and Rachel are setting up a payment plan. I assumed they would. It's going to take them several years. That's how debt works. Another pause. Your mother wants to apologize, he said finally. I took that in. She knows she handled it poorly. That's one way to describe it. She didn't think you'd show up, he repeated. I always show up, I said. And that was the difference. For years, they'd counted on that. Counted on my presence. Counted on my money. Counted on my silence. Would you consider coming for Thanksgiving? He asked after a moment. That surprised me. We're not pretending this didn't happen, I said. I wouldn't expect that. I looked out at the darkening yard. This was no longer about the bill. It was about whether they finally understood what the real damage had been. Dad, I said. The worst part wasn't the contract. What was it, the assumption that I'd accept being treated like that and still fix it? He didn't answer right away. When he finally did, his voice sounded older. I see that now. Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. But for the first time, someone in that house had said something other than "you can't afford it." And that mattered. Because this was never about money. It was about whether I was family or just reliable. The next 2 weeks were quiet. No late-night arguments, no dramatic texts. Just space. At my age. Silence doesn't make me anxious. It usually means people are sitting with something they can't argue their way out of. I kept my routine. Morning walks before the Georgia heat climbed. Coffee at the same table. Tuesdays and Thursdays at the Veterans Center. Helping men twice my age sort out paperwork the government had tangled for them. Real consequences. Real solutions. One Thursday afternoon. My phone buzzed while I was loading groceries into the truck. Dad, I answered. They've set up a payment plan, he said without greeting. Daniel and Rachel met with the vineyard. That's good. It'll take them 3, maybe 4 years. That's manageable. A pause. They're not fighting it anymore, he added. They understand it's their responsibility. I leaned against the side of the truck. I figured they would. Another pause. Longer this time. Your mother wants to apologize, he said. I heard. She's been thinking about what you said. That's good too. She'd like you to come for Thanksgiving. I didn't answer right away. Thanksgiving had always been predictable. Turkey? Football? Conversations that avoided anything uncomfortable. This year would be different. If I come, I said slowly. It won't be to pretend none of this happened. I wouldn't expect that. And I'm not paying $1 of that bill. I know. He exhaled quietly. Daniel's embarrassed, he added. Embarrassment isn't fatal, I replied. It's educational. He chuckled softly. You always did talk like that. That comes with age. We were quiet for a moment. Then he said something unexpected. You handled this better than I would have. I let that settle. I handled it the only way I could. After we hung up, I sat in the truck for a minute before turning the key. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. What stays is clarity. They'd made their choice. I'd made mine. I hadn't attacked anyone. I hadn't exposed them publicly. I'd simply refused to carry what wasn't mine. That's not revenge. That's a boundary. Thanksgiving would tell me whether they understood the difference. Either way, I'd be walking into that house differently than I had before. Not as the man who fixes things, just as the man who shows up. And this time, that would be enough. Thanksgiving arrived under a gray Ohio sky. I left Savannah before dawn. The highway empty except for the occasional trucker pushing north. 8 hours gives a man time to rehearse conversations he may or may not have. I didn't rehearse anything this time. I wasn't driving toward a confrontation. I was driving toward clarity. By late afternoon, I pulled into my parents' driveway. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Same siding, same maple tree in the front yard. Time shrinks things. My father opened the door before I knocked. We stood there for a second, measuring each other in the quiet. Hi, Dad. Michael. He stepped aside. Come in. The house smelled the same turkey, stuffing, cinnamon. My mother was in the kitchen when I walked in. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on a dish towel. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she crossed the room and hugged me. Not polite, not brief. Real. I'm sorry, she said into my shoulder. 2 words. No explanation, no defense. I nodded once. I know. She stepped back, eyes wet. I handled the wedding terribly, she said. I thought if we put your name on the contract, you'd cover it quietly and no one would be embarrassed. That sounds like something I would have done, I said evenly. She winced at that. I didn't realize how much it would hurt you. It wasn't the money, I replied. It was being told I wasn't family. Her eyes dropped. That was wrong, she said. Behind her. Daniel entered the kitchen with Rachel beside him. He looked different. Not older, just less certain. Hey, he said. Hey. A quiet beat. I owe you an apology, he added. I shouldn't have put your name on that contract. I shouldn't have assumed. No, I agreed. Rachel stepped forward slightly. We're on a payment plan, she said. We're handling it. I heard. It's going to take time, Daniel admitted. That's fine. He studied my face. You're not angry. I was, I said. But anger doesn't fix paperwork. A faint, embarrassed smile crossed his face. We've had to sit down and really go over our finances, Rachel added. Spreadsheets, budget cuts, the whole thing. That's not a bad way to start a marriage, I said. Dinner was quieter than it used to be when we were younger. Fewer jokes, more eye contact. No one pretending the past few weeks hadn't happened. After the dishes were cleared and the house settled, my father and I sat in the living room. I always thought strength meant solving everyone else's problems, he said. A lot of people think that. He nodded slowly. Watching you these past weeks, I realized strength can also mean refusing to carry what isn't yours. I looked at him. That took you long enough, I said. He smiled faintly. I'm proud of you. Son? At 63. Those words still mattered more than I expected. Later that night, I stood in my old bedroom and looked out the window at the quiet street. The wedding, the contract, the phone calls. It had started as betrayal. It ended as correction. Respect matters more than money. Honesty matters more than appearance. And sometimes the strongest move a man can make isn't loud. It's standing his ground long enough for the truth to catch up. If this story reminds you of someone who had to learn that lesson the hard way, share it with them. And if you appreciate stories about family, accountability, and quiet strength, consider subscribing, because sometimes the calmest decisions leave the deepest mark. This story is inspired by real-life themes. Names and certain details have been adapted for privacy.